Long before the walls of Troy burned, long before the wooden monument that would end a decade of bloodshed, there was a boy born on a rocky island in the Ionian Sea. Ithaca was not a kingdom of gold or marble. It was a land of goat herds and fishermen, of olive groves clinging to hillsides and waves crashing against cliffs that had stood since the time of the Titans. But from this rugged soil came a king whose name would echo through eternity. His father was Laertes, a man who had sailed with the Argonauts in his youth, who had hunted the great creature of Calydon alongside the mightiest heroes of his generation. His mother was Anticlea, daughter of the trickster Autolycus, who was himself the son of Hermes, the messenger of the gods. From his father, the boy inherited courage. From his mother's bloodline, he inherited something rarer, cunning, the ability to see not just what was in front of him, but what lay 3 moves ahead. It was his grandfather Autolycus who gave him his name. The old man had traveled to Ithaca when the child was still in swaddling clothes, and when asked what the boy should be called, he thought of his own life. He had angered many men and women across the earth. He had made enemies of mortals and drawn the attention of gods. And so he named the child Odysseus, which meant the son of pain, or perhaps the one who causes pain to others. The name would prove prophetic. But that revelation lay decades in the future. The boy grew in the shadow of his father's legends. He learned to sail before he could properly run. He learned to hunt in the forests that covered the island's slopes. He learned to speak and discovered that his tongue could accomplish what his hands could not. Where other boys settled disputes with fists, young Odysseus settled them with words. He could convince a merchant to lower his price. He could persuade a rival to become an ally. He could talk his way out of any situation, and this gift would serve him well in the trials to come. But he was no coward. When the moment required action, Odysseus acted. He could throw a spear with deadly accuracy. He could wrestle men twice his size to the ground. He could draw a bow that other men struggled to string. The combination was unprecedented. Strength and cunning, courage and calculation, all housed in a single mortal frame. The gods took notice. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, looked down from Olympus and saw something in this boy that pleased her. She saw a mind that worked like her own, and she decided that Odysseus of Ithaca would be hers to protect. Years passed like waves against the shore. Odysseus grew into a man and then into a king. Laertes, weary from his own adventures, stepped aside and let his son take the throne. The young king proved capable. Ithaca prospered under his rule. The fishing boats returned full. The olive presses ran with oil. The people looked at their king and saw a leader who would keep them safe. But something was missing. Odysseus was a king without a queen, and so he turned his attention to the matter of marriage. Word had spread across the Greek world that Helen, daughter of Tyndareus of Sparta, was seeking a husband. She was said to be the most beautiful woman ever born, a daughter of Zeus himself, though her mortal father had raised her as his own. Kings and princes from every corner of the land descended on Sparta to compete for her hand. Odysseus sailed among them. He saw Helen and understood immediately why men would go to war for her. Her beauty was not merely physical. It was something that reached into a man's chest and squeezed. But Odysseus was not blinded by it. He looked around the great hall of Sparta and saw dozens of powerful men, each convinced that he alone would win the prize. He saw the potential for catastrophe. This was the moment that first revealed the true depth of his cunning. Odysseus approached Tyndareus not as a suitor, but as an advisor. He pointed out the obvious danger. When Helen chose one man, all the others would feel rejected. Wounded pride could turn to violence. The rejected suitors might start a war right there in Sparta, or carry their grievances home to fester into something worse. Tyndareus listened, his face growing pale. He had not considered this. He asked Odysseus what could be done. And Odysseus told him, before Helen made her choice, all the suitors should swear an oath. They would vow to accept her decision without violence. More than that, they would pledge to defend her chosen husband against anyone who tried to take her from him. If any man violated the marriage, all the suitors would unite to punish the offender. It was elegant, it was simple, it bound the most powerful men in Greece together with words instead of chains. Tyndareus agreed immediately. The oath was sworn. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, and the other suitors accepted her decision with grace. They had no choice. They had given their word before the gods. But the oath would have consequences that none of them could foresee. It would drag Odysseus into a war he did not want. It would take him away from his home for 20 years. The price of his own cleverness would be paid in blood and tears and decades of suffering. But that price was not yet due. As a reward for his counsel, Tyndareus helped Odysseus secure a different bride. Penelope was the daughter of Icarius, a Spartan nobleman. She was not Helen. She did not possess that dangerous, world-shattering beauty. But she had something better: intelligence, wit, a mind that could match Odysseus's own. When he first met her, they spoke for hours. She challenged him with riddles, he responded with stories. She laughed at his jokes and offered better ones. By the end of that first conversation, Odysseus knew he had found his equal. They were married in Ithaca, beneath the olive trees. The wedding feast lasted for 7 days. Poets sang of the union between the cunning king and his clever queen. And for a few brief years, Odysseus was happy. Truly, completely happy. His kingdom was secure. His wife was everything he had hoped for. And then Penelope told him that she was with child. Odysseus placed his hand on her belly and felt the flutter of movement within. A son. He would have a son. The heir to Ithaca. The continuation of his bloodline. In that moment, holding his wife in the great hall of his ancestors, Odysseus wanted nothing more than to remain on his island forever. He had no desire for glory or conquest. He wanted only this: his home, his wife, his child. The fates had other plans. The news arrived like a storm on a clear day. Paris, Prince of Troy, had visited Sparta as a guest of Menelaus, and he had left with something that did not belong to him: Helen. Whether she went willingly or was taken by force, the accounts varied, but the result was the same. The most beautiful woman in the world was now in Troy, sharing the bed of a foreign prince. The oath that Odysseus had crafted came back to haunt him. Menelaus called upon all the former suitors to honor their pledge. They had sworn to defend his marriage. Now they were bound to sail to Troy and bring Helen back. Odysseus received the summons with dread in his heart. His son had just been born. The boy they named Telemachus was only weeks old, still nursing at his mother's breast. Odysseus looked at his wife, looked at his child, and made a decision that would alter the course of history. He refused to go, but the Greeks would not accept his refusal. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of the Greek forces, sent an embassy to Ithaca. The delegation included Palamedes, a clever man who had his own reputation for cunning. They found Odysseus in the fields outside the palace. He was plowing the earth with mismatched animals yoked together, sowing salt into the furrows instead of seeds. He babbled nonsense and drooled. The king of Ithaca had gone mad. It was a performance worthy of the greatest actor. Odysseus had calculated that no army would want a madman in its ranks. If he could convince the Greeks that he had lost his mind, they would leave him in peace. He could stay on Ithaca with his wife and son. He could watch Telemachus grow. He could live the quiet life he wanted. But Palamedes was not fooled. The cunning recognized the cunning. Without warning, he snatched the infant Telemachus from Penelope's arms and placed the child directly in the path of the plow. Odysseus had a choice: continue his mad act and watch his own son be crushed, or drop the pretense and save the boy. There was no choice at all. Odysseus threw aside the plow and swept his son to safety. His eyes met Palamedes, and in that gaze was the promise of future vengeance. The game was over. His sanity was proven, and he was bound by his own oath to sail for Troy. The last night before his departure was the longest of his life. He held Penelope in the darkness and whispered promises he was not certain he could keep. He would come back. No matter what happened, no matter how long it took, he would find his way home to her. She wept against his chest. She did not try to stop him. She knew the weight of oaths sworn before the gods, but she made him promise. Come back to me. Whatever you have to do, whoever you have to become, come back. He kissed her forehead. He kissed his sleeping son. And when dawn broke over Ithaca, Odysseus boarded his ship and sailed away toward a war that would consume the next 10 years of his life. The Greek fleet gathered at Aulis, more than 1,000 ships from across the Hellenic world. It was the largest military force ever assembled, carrying the greatest warriors of the age. Achilles was there, the near-immortal son of a goddess, whose rage would become the stuff of legend. Ajax the Great was there, a mountain of a man who could hold a battle line by himself. Diomedes was there, bold enough to wound gods in combat, and among them stood Odysseus, who brought only 12 ships from his small island. He was not the strongest warrior, he was not the fastest or the fiercest, but within weeks every commander in the army knew his value. When disputes arose between the proud kings, Odysseus mediated. When strategy was required, Odysseus planned. When the army needed a spokesman to negotiate with enemies or rally wavering allies, Odysseus spoke. He became indispensable. The war began with optimism. The Greeks assumed they would crush Troy in a matter of months. They were wrong. Troy's walls had been built by the gods themselves. Poseidon and Apollo had laid those stones in an earlier age, and no mortal force could breach them. The city was wealthy and well supplied, with allies across Anatolia ready to send reinforcements. What the Greeks had imagined as a quick campaign became a siege. And the siege became a nightmare. Years passed, 1, then 2, then 5, then more. Men died by the thousands. Disease swept through the camps. Supplies ran low. Morale crumbled. The warriors who had arrived as young men grew old in the shadow of walls they could not penetrate. Odysseus watched his companions fall. He watched heroes succumb to wounds, to plague, to despair. He himself survived close call after close call, protected by Athena's unseen hand. But survival was not victory. Every night, lying in his tent, he thought of Ithaca. He thought of Penelope. He wondered if his son would even recognize him. The boy would be growing now, walking, talking, learning to be a prince without a father to guide him. The thought was a constant wound that never healed. But Odysseus did not break. He bent his mind to the problem of Troy. He ran missions behind enemy lines. He captured Trojan spies and extracted information. He worked to identify the weaknesses in the Trojan alliance. And slowly, a plan began to form in his thoughts. A plan so audacious that it would either end the war or get them all killed. The 10th year of the war brought the final crisis. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, withdrew from the fighting after a dispute with Agamemnon. Without him, the Greeks suffered defeat after defeat. The Trojans, led by Prince Hector, pushed them back to their ships. For a moment, it seemed the entire expedition would end in disaster. Odysseus was among those sent to persuade Achilles to return. He used every rhetorical tool he possessed. He appealed to glory, to honor, to friendship, to revenge. Achilles listened, but refused. His anger was too great. It was only the death of Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion, that finally brought the warrior back to battle. Achilles killed Hector. Paris killed Achilles, guided by Apollo's hand. The war continued, now without its greatest hero on either side. And still Troy's walls stood. The Greeks held councils night after night, debating what to do. Some wanted to go home. They had been away too long. Their kingdoms needed them. Others insisted on fighting until victory, regardless of the cost. The arguments went in circles, accomplishing nothing. Until Odysseus spoke. He did not shout. He did not pound the table. He simply stood and described what he had been thinking about for months. They could not break Troy's walls by force. That much was clear after 10 years of trying. But walls only protected against enemies outside. What if they could get soldiers inside the walls before the attack began? The other commanders stared at him. Agamemnon asked how such a thing could be accomplished. Odysseus told them. They would build a great wooden monument, hollow on the inside. They would hide their best warriors within it. They would pretend to sail away, leaving the monument as an offering to the gods. The Trojans, believing the war was over, would bring the offering inside their city. And that night, the hidden soldiers would emerge and open the gates. The army would return under cover of darkness. Troy would fall. The silence in the tent was absolute. Some of the commanders thought he was mad. Others thought it might just work. Agamemnon made the decision. They would try it. If Odysseus was wrong, they would all die. If he was right, they would finally go home. The craftsman Epius supervised the construction. It took 3 days. The monument rose on the beach outside Troy, towering and magnificent, inscribed with the dedication to Athena. Inside, there was space for 40 warriors. Odysseus chose them himself. He chose men who could stay silent in the darkness for hours, men who would not panic in confined spaces, men who were willing to bet their lives on his plan. He chose himself to lead them. On the final night, the selected warriors climbed inside. The rest of the army burned their camps and sailed away, but only as far as the nearby island of Tenedos, where they waited out of sight. Inside the monument, Odysseus and his men sat in total darkness. They could not speak. They could barely breathe. The smallest sound could give them away. Hours passed like years. They heard the Trojans emerging from their gates, exclaiming over the abandoned Greek camp. They heard voices debating what to do with the monument. They heard a priest named Laocoon warn against bringing it inside. They heard Cassandra, the prophetess princess, screaming that it would destroy them all. And then they heard something else, a woman's voice circling their hiding place. Helen herself had come to inspect the monument. She called out names, imitating the voices of the hidden warriors' wives. She was testing them, trying to trick them into revealing themselves. One of the men, Anticlus, nearly answered. Odysseus clamped his hand over the warrior's mouth and held it there until Helen moved away. The moment passed. The decision was made. Despite all warnings, the Trojans brought the monument inside their city. That night, they celebrated. 10 years of war were over. The Greeks had given up. The drinking and singing lasted until well past midnight. And when the city finally slept, the trap door opened. Odysseus was the first to drop to the ground. The streets were empty. The guards were drunk or unconscious. He and his men moved through the darkness like ghosts, killing sentries, cutting throats, making their way to the gates. They swung them open. On the plain below, the Greek army had returned. They poured into Troy like a flood. The city that had resisted for a decade fell in a single night. By dawn, it was ash and rubble and corpses. Odysseus stood on the battlements and watched the destruction. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and a desperate, overwhelming need to go home. If this story is gripping you, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Here, every narrative is a journey through the myths that shaped civilizations. And what comes next in Odysseus's tale will test the limits of human endurance and divine patience. The war was over, but for Odysseus, the true ordeal was just beginning. The fleet sailed from the burning ruins of Troy, with holds full of plunder and hearts full of hope. The journey home should have taken weeks. It would take 10 years. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. A storm scattered the ships, driving some off course and sinking others. Odysseus managed to keep his 12 vessels together, but they were blown far from their intended path. They made landfall at a place called Ismarus, home of a people called the Ciconies. It should have been a simple raid. The Greeks attacked the city, took what they wanted, and prepared to leave. But Odysseus's men had grown arrogant after their victory at Troy. They ignored his orders to depart quickly. They stayed to feast on captured wine and livestock, and the Ciconies sent messengers to their neighbors. The counterattack came at dawn. Fresh enemies poured down from the hills, more than the Greeks could handle. They fought their way back to the ships, but not before losing 6 men from each vessel. 72 dead because his crew would not listen. Odysseus buried the corpses on the beach and set sail again, the first lesson of the voyage already learned. The sea would not forgive mistakes. The winds carried them south and east, into waters no Greek had charted. They came to a strange island, where lotus flowers bloomed in every color. The inhabitants seemed peaceful. They offered the visitors food. 3 of Odysseus's men ate the lotus. They forgot everything: their homes, their families, their own names. They wanted only to stay on that island forever, eating the flowers that erased all memory and desire. Odysseus had to drag them back to the ships by force. He bound them to the rowing benches until the effects wore off. The fleet escaped, but the incident shook him. This was not the familiar world they had left. The rules were different here. The dangers were stranger. They needed to be more careful, but careful was exactly what they were not. The next island rose from the sea like a mountain. Caves dotted its slopes. Flocks grazed on its hillsides. Odysseus decided to explore. He took 12 of his best men and a skin of wine and approached the largest cave. It was enormous, clearly the home of some giant. Cheeses lined the walls. Lambs and kids huddled in pens. Odysseus's men wanted to take what they could and leave immediately. He refused. He wanted to see what creature lived here. He wanted to test himself. Pride, it would cost him dearly. The cave's inhabitant returned at dusk. Polyphemus, a monster with a single enormous eye in the center of his forehead. Son of Poseidon, god of the seas. He herded his flocks inside and sealed the entrance with a boulder that 20 men could not have moved. Then he saw the Greeks. There was no negotiation, no hospitality. The monster snatched up 2 of Odysseus's men, 1 in each hand, and devoured them raw, bones crunching, blood spraying. The remaining Greeks could only watch in horror, trapped with no escape. Odysseus thought through the night. He could not kill the monster in his sleep because only Polyphemus was strong enough to move the boulder. Without him, they would be sealed in the cave forever. He needed another approach. The next evening, as Polyphemus ate 2 more men, Odysseus offered him the wine. The monster had never tasted anything so strong. He demanded more. He demanded to know his benefactor's name. Odysseus told him it was nobody. The monster laughed and promised that he would eat nobody last as a gift for the wine. Then he collapsed into drunken sleep. The Greeks moved. They had spent the day sharpening a massive stake from the monster's own club. Now they heated it in the fire until the point glowed orange. Odysseus led them. They drove the stake into the sleeping monster's eye, twisting it, grinding it deep. Polyphemus screamed. His howl shook the cave walls. He called out to the other giants living nearby, crying that nobody was killing him. His neighbors heard the words and laughed. If nobody was hurting him, they said, then he must be sick. They went back to sleep. The blinding had worked, but they still had to escape. At dawn, Polyphemus rolled back the boulder and sat in the entrance, feeling each animal as it passed to make sure no Greeks escaped. Odysseus had prepared for this. He and his remaining men clung to the undersides of the giant's flock, hidden beneath their bellies. The monster's hands passed over the animals' backs and felt nothing. They made it to the ship. They rowed for open water. And then Odysseus made the mistake that would haunt him for years. He could not resist. As they pulled away from shore, he shouted back at the blinded monster. He revealed his true name. He boasted. He claimed the victory as his own. Polyphemus heard every word, and Polyphemus prayed to his father. He prayed that Odysseus would never reach home, or if he did reach it, that he would arrive alone on a stranger's ship after years of suffering to find his house in chaos. Poseidon heard. Poseidon answered. The curse was set. From that moment on, the sea itself would be Odysseus's enemy. The next island brought hope before it brought despair. Aeolus, keeper of the winds, welcomed them as honored guests. He heard their story and sympathized. When they left, he gave Odysseus a gift. All the unfavorable winds captured and bound in a leather bag. Only the west wind was left free to carry them home. For 9 days, they sailed with perfect weather. On the 10th day, Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Odysseus could see the smoke rising from his own palace. He was so close, so impossibly close. He had not slept in days, steering the ship himself, refusing to trust anyone else with the task. But now, with home in sight, exhaustion overwhelmed him. He closed his eyes. It was only for a moment. His men gathered around the leather bag. They had been eyeing it for days, convinced that Odysseus was hoarding treasure. Gold and silver from Aeolus, kept for himself while they shared the labor. They opened it. The winds exploded outward in a screaming gale. The ships were caught and flung backward, all the way across the sea, all the way back to Aeolus's island. Odysseus went to the keeper of the winds and begged for help a second time. Aeolus refused. He said the gods clearly hated this man. He wanted nothing to do with someone cursed by Olympus. The doors closed. The Greeks sailed on without divine assistance. The island of the Laestrygonians rose from the sea like a fortress, a natural harbor surrounded by towering cliffs. Odysseus, cautious now, anchored his own ship outside the harbor's mouth. The other 11 captains brought their vessels inside. It was a fatal error. The inhabitants were not men. They were giants, savage and hungry. They appeared on the cliffs above the harbor and began hurling boulders. The ships below had nowhere to flee. They were crushed and sunk one by one. The giants speared the drowning sailors like fish and carried them away to be eaten. Odysseus watched the massacre from outside the harbor. He watched 11 ships destroyed, hundreds of men killed, a decade's worth of companions erased in minutes. He cut the anchor rope and fled before the giants could reach his vessel. One ship remained from the fleet that had left Troy. One ship with one crew, carrying the weight of everyone they had lost. Grief and horror marked the days that followed. They sailed without purpose, driven by winds they could not control, until they reached another island, Aiaia. It was a beautiful place, green and peaceful, with smoke rising from a structure in the interior. Odysseus sent half his crew to investigate. They found a palace surrounded by strange creatures. What appeared to be tame beasts wandered the grounds, but their eyes held something unsettlingly human. The men should have run. They did not. A woman appeared at the door. Her name was Circe. She was beautiful, a goddess in all but title, possessed of powers that bent nature itself. She invited the scouts inside. She fed them a feast. She poured them wine. And when they had eaten their fill, she touched them with her wand. Their bodies twisted, their faces stretched. Their voices became grunts and squeals. In moments, she had transformed them all. Only one man escaped. Eurylochus had stayed outside, suspicious of the too welcoming palace. He raced back to the ship and gasped out what he had witnessed. Odysseus went alone to confront the witch. On the path through the forest, he encountered a young man, Hermes, messenger of the gods, disguised as a mortal. Athena had sent him to help. He gave Odysseus a plant called moly, black-rooted with a white flower, proof against Circe's magic. He instructed Odysseus on how to defeat her. When the witch offered her enchanted wine, Odysseus drank without effect. When she struck him with her wand, nothing happened. He drew his sword and held it to her throat. She surrendered immediately. She restored his men to human form. She offered her palace as a place of rest. Odysseus, desperate to give his crew a respite from constant danger, accepted. They stayed for 1 year. It was a year of peace, of feasting, of forgetting the horrors behind them. Odysseus shared Circe's bed. He let himself believe, briefly, that perhaps he could stay, perhaps he could build a new life on this island. But the year ended. His men reminded him of their oaths, of their families, of Ithaca. And Odysseus remembered. He asked Circe how to complete the journey home. Her answer was not what he expected. Before he could reach Ithaca, she said, he must first go to the land of the dead. No living man had ever sailed to the underworld and returned, but Circe told him it was necessary. The prophet Tiresias dwelt among the shades, and only Tiresias could reveal the path through the dangers ahead. She gave him instructions. She told him what sacrifices to make, what spirits to summon, what questions to ask. Odysseus gathered his crew and announced their destination. The men were terrified. One of them, young Elpenor, got drunk the night before departure. He climbed to the roof of Circe's palace to sleep in the cool air. In the morning chaos, half awake, he stepped off the edge and fell to his death. They left his body unburied in their haste. It would return to haunt them. The voyage to the underworld was a passage through darkness. They sailed to the edge of the world, to a place where the sun never shone and the river ocean wrapped around everything. Odysseus beached the ship and performed the rituals Circe had described. He dug a pit. He poured offerings of milk and honey and wine and water. He sacrificed animals and let the dark blood flow. The shades came. They rose from the earth like mist, drawn by the smell of blood. They could not speak until they drank. The first ghost was Elpenor. He begged Odysseus to return to Circe's island and give his body proper burial. Odysseus promised. The next ghost was Tiresias himself. The prophet drank the blood, and his eyes cleared. He spoke of the journey ahead. He warned of the dangers waiting in the sea. He warned specifically of an island where sacred livestock grazed. If Odysseus's men harmed those animals, they would never see home again. Only Odysseus might survive, and only after terrible suffering. The prophet gave one more prophecy. Even if Odysseus reached Ithaca, his troubles would not end there. He would have to undertake another journey, traveling inland until he found people who did not know the sea, and there make offerings to appease Poseidon. Only then could he die in peace. In old age, far from the water that had tormented him, other shades gathered. Odysseus saw his mother among them, Anticlea. She had died during his absence from grief, waiting for a son who never came home. He tried to embrace her. His arms passed through empty air 3 times. She told him of conditions in Ithaca. His father had retreated from the palace, living like a beggar on his own land. His wife was surrounded by suitors, men who wanted her hand and his throne. His son was growing up without him. Each word was a knife in his chest. He saw other souls as well, heroes of the past. Agamemnon, murdered by his own wife upon returning from Troy. Achilles, who said he would rather be a living slave than king of all the dead. Ajax, who refused to speak because of a grudge from the war. The parade of ghosts continued until Odysseus could bear no more. He returned to his ship and fled that terrible place. They sailed back to Circe's island and burned Elpenor's body with full honors. Then they departed for the final legs of the journey. Circe had warned them about what came next. The sirens, creatures whose song was irresistible. Sailors who heard their music threw themselves into the sea and drowned, or steered their ships onto the rocks to get closer. No one who heard the song could resist. Odysseus wanted to hear it anyway. He wanted to know what enchantment could be worth a man's life. He ordered his crew to plug their ears with beeswax. He ordered them to tie him to the mast and ignore any commands he gave until they were past. The ship approached the Sirens' Island. The creatures began to sing. Odysseus heard words that promised knowledge. They sang that they knew everything that had happened at Troy. They knew everything that would ever happen anywhere on earth. They could tell him secrets beyond mortal understanding. All he had to do was come closer. He strained against the ropes. He screamed at his men to release him. They could not hear. They rowed harder, their ears sealed, watching their captain thrash and howl. The song faded. The island fell behind. Odysseus slumped against the mast, exhausted, weeping. He had survived, but part of him would always wonder what the sirens would have revealed. Two more obstacles waited, Scylla and Charybdis, a monster and a maelstrom positioned on opposite sides of a narrow strait. There was no path that avoided both. Circe had advised him to sail closer to Scylla. Charybdis would swallow the entire ship. Scylla would only take a few men. It was the cold calculus of survival. Sacrifice some to save the rest. Odysseus did not tell his crew. They entered the strait. On one side, the whirlpool roared, sucking down water and spitting it back up 3 times a day. On the other side, a cliff rose from the sea, and in that cliff was a cave, and in that cave lived something that defied description. 6 heads on 6 long necks, each head with 3 rows of teeth. The heads shot down like striking vipers and snatched 6 sailors from the deck. The men screamed Odysseus's name as they were carried up. They screamed until the teeth silenced them. The ship sailed on. There was nothing else to do. They reached the island Tiresias had warned them about, Thrinacia, home of sacred livestock belonging to Helios, the sun god. The animals were immortal, perfect, never to be touched by mortal hands. Odysseus wanted to sail past without stopping. His men refused. They were exhausted, starving, terrified. They needed to rest. Odysseus made them swear an oath not to harm any of the sacred creatures. They agreed. They made camp. And then the weather turned. For 1 month, the winds blew against them. Their supplies ran out. They fished and hunted, but it was not enough. The sacred livestock grazed nearby, fat and healthy, while the sailors starved. Odysseus went inland to pray, seeking divine guidance. While he was gone, Eurylochus convinced the others to break their oath. It was better to die with full bellies than waste away to nothing. They slaughtered the animals. They roasted the meat. They were still eating when Odysseus returned. He saw what they had done and felt his heart stop. There was nothing he could do. The crime was already committed. They sailed as soon as the winds allowed. They did not get far. Zeus sent a thunderbolt that shattered the ship. Poseidon sent waves that drowned the crew. Every man died except Odysseus himself. He clung to the broken wreckage and drifted for 9 days. The sea carried him to the last and longest of his prisons, Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. She found him on the shore, more dead than alive, and nursed him back to health. She was beautiful, immortal, possessed of a comfortable cavern home where they wanted for nothing. She fell in love with him. She offered him immortality. She offered to make him a god, young forever, if he would stay and be her husband. For 7 years, Odysseus lived on her island, 7 years of comfort and plenty, 7 years of a goddess's devotion, and 7 years of despair. Every day, he walked to the cliffs and stared across the water toward the home he could not reach. Every night, he lay beside a divine woman and dreamed of his mortal wife. Calypso could give him anything except the one thing he wanted. She could not give him Ithaca. On Olympus, the gods debated his fate. Athena argued for his release. She had protected him for so long, guided him through so many dangers. She wanted to see him home at last. Poseidon resisted. He had not forgiven the blinding of his son. But Poseidon was away, and in his absence the other gods voted. Hermes flew to Calypso's island with Zeus's command. The nymph had to let Odysseus go. She wept. She accused the gods of jealousy, of cruelty toward any goddess who loved a mortal man. But she could not defy Zeus. She helped Odysseus build a raft. She provided food and water and favorable winds. She watched him sail away toward the horizon, toward the wife who had somehow held his heart, even against immortal competition. Poseidon returned and saw what had happened. He was furious, but could not undo Zeus's decree. Instead, he waited until Odysseus was within sight of land. Then he struck. The storm came from nowhere, waves like mountains, wind that screamed like a living thing. The raft came apart piece by piece. Odysseus was flung into the churning sea. He was drowning, choking on salt water, his strength finally failing. A goddess saw him, Ino, who had once been a mortal woman before the sea transformed her. She gave him a veil that would keep him from drowning. She told him to swim. He swam for 2 days and nights. He swam until his arms were numb and his eyes were blind with exhaustion. He washed up on the shore of Phaeacia, naked, covered in brine, more wreckage than man. And there, in that unlikely place, his luck finally turned. The Phaeacians were the greatest sailors in the world. Their ships could find any destination. Their king, Alcinous, was known for his hospitality. His daughter, Nausicaa, found Odysseus on the beach and brought him to the palace. They fed him. They clothed him. They asked his story. Odysseus told them everything, from Troy to that very beach. The listening court wept at his suffering and marveled at his endurance. Alcinous promised to provide a ship to carry him home at last. The voyage was peaceful. The Phaeacian ship was swift and true. Odysseus fell asleep on deck, lulled by the gentle motion of a sea that finally seemed willing to let him pass. He woke on the shore of Ithaca. For a moment, he did not recognize it. Mist covered the beach. The Phaeacians had already departed. But then the mist cleared, and Athena stood before him. She had never stopped watching over him. She told him what awaited. His palace was occupied by more than 100 suitors, all seeking to marry Penelope and claim his throne. They believed he was dead. They had been feasting on his wealth for years. If he revealed himself now, they would kill him. He needed to be cunning one more time. She disguised him as an old beggar, aged and bent and unrecognizable. She sent him to the hut of Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, to gather information and allies. And she went to fetch his son. Telemachus had grown into a man. For 20 years, he had lived without his father, hearing only stories of a hero who never came home. He had watched the suitors devour his inheritance. He had watched his mother's strength slowly erode. He had gone on a journey of his own, seeking news of his father from the kings who had fought beside him at Troy. Now Athena called him back to Ithaca, warned him of the suitors' plot to kill him, and guided him to the swineherd's hut. Father and son met for the first time since Telemachus was an infant. When Athena lifted the disguise for a moment, Telemachus saw his father's true face. The young man wept. He could not believe it. He thought it must be some god playing tricks. But Odysseus convinced him. They embraced. They planned. The suitors would die. All of them. Odysseus returned to his palace in beggar's rags. He walked through halls that had once been his, seeing strangers lounging on his furniture, eating his food, drinking his wine. The suitors mocked him. They threw scraps at him. One of them, Antinous, struck him with a footstool. Odysseus absorbed every insult. He kept his eyes down and his hands open. But inside he was cataloguing faces. He was counting weapons. He was preparing for the reckoning. He encountered his old dog, Argos, lying on a dung heap outside the palace. 20 years earlier, Odysseus had raised that hound from a puppy. Now Argos was ancient, mangy, abandoned, but the dog knew his master. His tail wagged, his eyes brightened. He lacked the strength to stand, but he had held on long enough to see Odysseus return. Argos died moments later. Odysseus had to turn away so no one would see his tears. Penelope descended from her quarters to address the suitors. She did not recognize her husband in his disguise, but something about the beggar caught her attention. She invited him to speak with her privately. They talked through the night, the wife and the husband she did not know. He told her stories about Odysseus, claiming to have met him on his travels. He described the king's appearance, his clothing, his companions. Every detail was accurate. Penelope wept. She had not allowed herself to believe her husband might still live. But this stranger's account stirred something buried deep. She made a decision. She was tired of delaying. She would set a contest. Odysseus's great bow hung in the storeroom, unused since the day he left for Troy. Whoever could string that bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes in a row would win her hand. The beggar encouraged her plan. His eyes gleamed in the firelight. The next day the contest began. The bow was brought out. The axes were set up. One by one, the suitors tried to string the weapon. They could not even bend it. They warmed the wood. They greased the string. They strained until their faces turned red and their muscles screamed. The bow remained unstrung. Penelope's challenge seemed impossible. And then the beggar asked for a turn. The suitors laughed, they mocked, they threatened. But Telemachus insisted that the stranger be allowed his attempt. The bow was placed in the beggar's hands. Odysseus felt the familiar weight. He tested the string with his fingers. He bent the weapon with the ease of a musician tuning an instrument. The string slipped into place. He selected an arrow. He drew. He released. The arrow flew through all 12 axes without touching the sides. The laughter stopped. Odysseus threw off his rags. He stood revealed in his true form. The bow was already armed with a second arrow. Antinous raised his wine cup, unaware that he was about to die. The arrow took him through the throat. He collapsed with blood pouring from his mouth and wine spilling from his hand. The suitors finally understood. They scrambled for weapons, but Telemachus had hidden them all during the night. They tried to rush the doors, but Eumaeus and another loyal servant had barred them shut. They were trapped in the hall with a man who had survived 20 years of war and wandering, who had outsmarted gods and monsters, who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. The slaughter was methodical. Odysseus shot until his arrows ran out. Then he fought with sword and spear. Telemachus fought beside him, finally proving himself a warrior worthy of his lineage. The loyal servants joined the battle. Athena appeared briefly, disguised as a friend, to offer encouragement before stepping back to watch. By the time it ended, 108 suitors lay dead. The hall was a lake of blood. The servants who had collaborated with the suitors were executed. The palace was purified with fire and sulfur. Odysseus stood in the ruins of the massacre and breathed. It was over. All of it. Troy, the voyage, the suffering. He was home. But one test remained. Penelope had heard the fighting. She had heard that the beggar was her husband returned. She wanted to believe, but she had wanted to believe so many times before. She came down to the hall and looked at the man who claimed to be Odysseus. He looked different. 20 years had changed him. Suffering had marked his face. She could not be certain. She devised a final trial. She told the servants to move the marriage bed out of her chamber so the stranger could sleep on it. Odysseus reacted with shock. That bed could not be moved. He had built it himself years ago around a living olive tree that served as one of its posts. Unless someone had cut through the trunk, the bed was part of the palace's foundation. Penelope knew. Only Odysseus could have known that secret. She fell into his arms. They wept together. 20 years of separation dissolved in a single embrace. The recognition was complete. The reunion was real. The aftermath was not simple. Odysseus had killed more than 100 of Ithaca's young men, the sons of noble families, the heirs of powerful houses. Their relatives demanded blood. War threatened. Odysseus armed himself to face them. Telemachus stood at his side, but Zeus sent a thunderbolt to halt the conflict. Athena appeared and commanded peace. The families of the dead would accept compensation. Odysseus would remain king. There would be no civil war. The epic ended not with victory in battle, but with reconciliation, with the restoration of order, with a man finally impossibly home. The seas have forgotten the path of his ships. The islands where he wept and fought and bled have changed their names a dozen times, but the story remains. It echoes in every soul who has ever been far from home and dreamed of return. In every heart that has chosen love over glory, family over immortality, the difficult path over the easy surrender. Odysseus lives, not in marble or bronze, but in the part of us that refuses to stop, refuses to forget, refuses to give up until we reach the shore we were always meant to find. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "I choose to keep going."